Order. Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Human Resources, Senator Payne, representing the Minister for Trade and Investment. Can the minister please update the Senate on how the recently signed China-Australia Free Trade Agreement has been received by Australian industry?
The Minister for Human Services, representing the Minister for Trade and Investment, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I can indeed update the Senate, Mr President, because this is a fabulous story, as Senator Scullion was just recently adverting to in his observations about the benefits for agriculture in Australia. It is going to unlock substantial new benefits for Australians for decades to come, Mr President. And in fact, industry has been universal in their praise for the agreement, which will see unprecedented access for Australian business to the world's second-largest economy. And let me just cite a couple of those, Mr President. The Business Council of Australia said, and I quote, "This historic agreement is a transformative moment for the Australian economy. It puts many of our most important sectors on a more competitive footing internationally and gives Australian companies enormous scope to boost trade and create jobs." Similarly, the Australian Industry Group has said that the agreement will provide Australian business with more export and investment opportunities through opening up access to the large Chinese market. And the Winemakers Confederation, Mr President, stated, and again I quote, "This much-awaited free trade agreement with China seals this year's trade trifecta and has the potential to add tens of millions of dollars to the Australian wine industry's export earnings." What CHAFTA will do, Mr President, is to create jobs and drive higher living standards for Australians. It is a transformational agreement that removes barriers to trade and investment and represents a high watermark in our relationship with China. And I know, Mr President, that the free trade forums which are being held around the country are attracting enormous attention from local businesses from one side of the country to the other, run by Minister Robb, Minister Bilson and, on occasion, the Prime Minister. So all of those industry groups that represent the members of those organisations are in fact confirming for the Australian government and for the Australian people the extraordinary value of the Australia-China Free Trade Agreement.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary question, Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr President. A supplementary question. Can the minister explain which sectors stand to benefit the most from this historic trade agreement?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. On current numbers, Mr President, 85% of Australian goods exports to China will be tariff-free. But at the time of full implementation of CHAFTA, that will in fact rise to 95% of Australian goods exports to China as tariff-free. Significantly, Mr President, and I think Senator Scullion mentioned this as well, Mr President, tariffs will be abolished for Australia's $13 billion dairy industry, and I know how welcome that will be, particularly on the south coast of New South Wales, for example, Mr President. Tariffs of up to 25% will be removed for Australia's beef and sheep farmers, and for wine, and I referred to the Winemakers Confederation views earlier, Mr President, tariffs on Australian wine of 14% to 30% will go within 4 years. Tariffs will also be eliminated on a wide range of Australian manufactured goods, particularly including pharmaceutical products, Mr President, which will be a great benefit to that industry in Australia.
The time for answering the question has expired. Senator Smith, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. A final supplementary question. Can the minister explain how the agreement further demonstrates that Australia is open for business?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I think it's worth noting that the negotiations for this free trade agreement with China commenced under the government of Prime Minister John Howard and have been completed by the government of Prime Minister Abbott. So between 2007 and 2013, Mr President, the talks languished pretty sadly. But we've built now on trade deals already concluded with Korea and Japan, and CHAFTA forms part of a powerful trifecta of agreements with three of Australia's largest export markets that account for more than 61% of our exports of goods. So we have achieved in 12 months what Labor couldn't achieve in 6 years, Mr President. This trade trifecta is further proof that Australia is absolutely open for business. It is giving us better market access to the world's second-largest economy. It improves our competitive position in a rapidly growing market. It promotes increased two-way investment and reduces import costs. It's a win-win for households and businesses alike, and it is a job creation.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering the question has expired. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr.